I'm Kelli Beougher, Senior Vice President at LinkShare. A little bit about my background. I've been with the company for just about 7 years, currently responsible for heading up our Lead Advantage business as well as network development and operations for our various publisher networks. So very pleased to be able to introduce my co-presenters today. They are all partners of LinkShare. So first, DC Cullinane to my right. DC is CEO and founder of thinkingVOICE, where he heads up all of their sales, business development, and partnership efforts. DC has 17 years of industry experience, so we're very fortunate to have him with us today to talk about the growing channel of pay-per-call. And then right next to DC, we've got John Engler, who's Vice President and General Manager of UnsubCentral. John heads up all of their sales, service, and marketing operations, and his team works with a vast number of advertisers, as well as networks and publishers, helping support their email channel with an emphasis on email compliance. And then finally, we have Dave Wengel, who's General Manager of the Interactive Markets for TARGUSinfo. Dave's actually founder of their Interactive Markets division, as well as their growing online lead quality summit. And he and his team are charged with developing best-in-breed online lead verification and scoring solutions for the industry. So very pleased to have them with us here today to join us for this session. So just before we get started, I wanted to get a show of hands. Can you give me a sense of how many folks in the room are advertisers? Okay, so quite a few advertisers. How many of you are publishers? And then networks or agencies? Okay, so a pretty good mix. So it looks like a little bit more weighted towards advertisers and publishers, which is great. So I'm going to kick things off. I'm just going to quickly take you through some industry research that looks at the lead gen landscape, looks at how it's been evolving. Then I'll hand it over to DC. He's going to talk about how pay-per-call can be a new way of tapping into sources of distribution for online lead generation. John's going to talk about email as an acquisition tool, and most importantly, how compliance plays an important role in that channel. And then Dave will tie it up by talking about how lead verification and scoring should be an important part of any strategy that you have. And then we'll, of course, open it up for questions from the audience. So with that, first a look at the landscape. So I think, oftentimes when we think about online lead generation, we immediately think about verticals with longer sales cycles, industries like finance, education, or real estate. And both, I guess, the good news and the bad news about this is that many of these industries are facing significant challenges. And also the lead gen practice overall has been under increased scrutiny because of regulatory concerns. But in spite of these things, it continues to be an important and growing aspect of the overall online ad market. And just looking at some research from a recent study done by eConsultancy, marketers are increasingly viewing lead gen as its own distinct discipline within their marketing efforts. And they continue to point to it as an area of growth. This year, 94% of respondents cited lead gen as being a key growth area as opposed to 82% last year. But I think the challenge is marketers feel that they could be doing a better job in how they go about managing this, and most importantly, how they're measuring the effectiveness of the different channels that they're investing in to drive leads to their business. And I think, no surprise to anyone in this room, and I don't think it's unique necessarily to lead gen, but traditional offline methods continue to fail to deliver the way they have in the past. And so as more of the dollars shift from offline to online channels, advertisers are more aggressively testing into new channels and trying to adopt a multi-channel approach. And again, I think consistent with what we see across the industry, some of the key channels for lead gen are in the areas of search, both natural and paid. Oftentimes clients ask me, to what extent are advertisers really still utilizing email marketing to drive leads for their business? That continues to be the number 2 tactic that advertisers are using, and then followed by affiliate marketing and display advertising. But consistent to what we hear at LinkShare, I think the effectiveness and the role that these channels play in a marketer's overall strategy can vary pretty significantly. And the biggest challenge is, how do we come up with a good system to measure the effectiveness of these channels, not just to the point that a lead is generated, but really understanding the lifetime value that these customers are generating, and going beyond the basics of understanding the volume of leads driven by certain sources, understanding how those leads are converting to customers and what the quality of those customers look like over time. And of course, a recurring theme that we're seeing is that marketers are paying much closer attention to the quality of the leads that they're getting from different sources. This is going to be an area that I think Dave is going to go into in much more detail. So just to wrap things up on my end before I hand it off to DC, I think the good news is that lead generation continues to be an important and growing discipline for marketers, but there are a number of challenges that we're facing as an industry. First, the need to balance the often competing priorities of, hey, I want volume, but I also need to make sure I'm getting the right mix of quality from the channels that I'm investing in. Also making sure that wherever you're sourcing leads, the leads that you're getting are getting to you in a timely manner, and you have a good strategy in place to follow up on and convert those leads. Sounds very simple, but oftentimes we see something that's not always put into practice. John's going to talk about some of the compliance and regulatory concerns that center around email. And then finally, as I mentioned, with increased competition, more and more marketers are adopting and trying to find ways to create a multi-channel approach around their efforts. And so with that, I'm going to hand it over to DC to talk a little bit about pay-per-call and where that fits into the lead gen landscape.
Thank you. So can I get a raise of hands from the audience as far as folks that have heard of pay-per-call or had any experience with it? Okay. And that would be, looks like a good publisher audience. How about merchants on the merchant side? Okay. So one of the things that's sort of been lacking, I think, in pay-per-call is a good online adoption or implementation of the technology and of the service, sort of fitting it into lead forms, and other ad units that can effectively drive a call and track that back to a publisher. So that really is at the heart of what we've built. The things that, in a really quick company background, we've been around for about 4 years, and we've built and processed probably 1 million calls, just over 1 million calls to date. Our investors include Mark Cuban and Jamie Krauthamel, who was a founder of Performix. We're headquartered in Redwood City, and we've been researching a few reports related to pay-per-call and the growth that the space has. So why pay-per-call? One of the things that we've heard from our customers and publishers is that consumers are facing a bit of form fatigue, so they're abandoning forms, they're not converting, and one of the things that can help convert is by shortening the form and making an effective call occur within the form. So less information is required to collect from the customer because you can get them on the phone at the point where the form exists. And so this has done a very good job in increasing conversion rates for advertisers. So if you've been in the business of buying leads and then generating outbound calls to those leads, you'll find that in many cases they're very difficult to get a hold of. Or you've maybe waited too long to get a hold of those customers or clients or prospects, and you can't convert them. So complex sales processes are really what we've addressed initially, and we'll go into the categories that we've had success in so far. Lead decay, tracking the call and helping it track back to the publisher and providing a platform to do that. And then the notion of an exclusive lead. So this lead is really driven to a single advertiser as opposed to many. And then we've done a very good job in the mobile CPA market, and we'll talk a little bit about that as well and show you some examples. So how do we do this? We do this with toll-free numbers, local phone numbers, and also a click-to-call application that we've built. And we've integrated that with a number of network partners to date. So we have the ability to fire pixels back to a network after a call has reached a specific duration that's established by the advertiser. So this is helpful to a network because they can actually see a monetized event occurs, and it can update to an ad server, so that way an ad server will continue to distribute the ad and weight it accordingly. So closing that loop with regards to a phone or a phone lead is really at the heart of what we've built, and it's helped to create some adoption online. Networks, publishers, and advertisers, we've had success with each. And a flexible billing system is also very critical. One that allows you to define a specified rate. It might be 15 seconds, it might be 30 seconds, it might even be as long as 90 seconds before you would pay a publisher for driving a phone call. And that's when both parties are talking to each other. So our system measures that and then fires a pixel after that duration has been met. So categories that we've seen great success in so far include insurance, debt consolidation, vacation and hotel reservations, DirecTV, Dish Network, ADT. You can see there's a pretty high-touch categories. EDU has been very successful for us recently. Some universities have adopted our platform to track calls and are pushing their publishers to drive traffic to these pages. Career counseling, distance learning, singles and dating, believe it or not. There are a number of advertisers that want a phone call in the dating space. Medical, and then of course services. Medical would be things like diabetes, subscriptions and things of that nature. So in the mobile space, what we've done is we have a number of publishers, just over a dozen, and they access our list of ads, and then they do a number of things. Some of them actually serve WAP-based landing pages for the offers, and in this case, you'll see a category browse, and then the ad is clicked on. You go to a WAP page where a phone number has been assigned to it. So it's very straightforward. In this model, we employ phone numbers or toll-free numbers. Mobile SMS has been another area where there's a great deal of inventory, and we've been able to access that. So updates like horoscopes, news, entertainment, and there's two ad types there. One where there's a 40-character ad unit, and the other where it's a pull. The customer replies and says, yes, I want more information. So in that case, you can push 100 characters to the client to qualify them before the call actually occurs. In the online space, what our advertisers have done is they have integrated our call tracking platform into their pages, and we as a result are able to track the referring site. So we're really agnostic. We don't care what network drove the click. We can track it, and it's passed with the call event. So click-to-call has been preferred in this model because one single click-to-call implementation can track tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of sites. As long as the information is passed along, those value pairs are contained in the call, then we'll track it back. So another area that we've provided some call tracking is when advertisers are buying keywords, and they've been curious as to whether keywords are driving phone calls. So that information is, again, attached with the call event that occurs, and so they can determine what kinds of keywords are driving phone calls and leads into their call center. And at the same time, it would track an ad unit placed on a partner site. These are examples of landing pages across a number of categories: EDU, diabetes, Dish, Packet 8, LA weight loss, and then Answer Financial, which is in the auto category. You can see the form is very simple. It's usually 2 to 3 fields, and a call event is kicked off. Now, when this call happens, the customer is updated. So inside the page, we'll tell the page a call is occurring. So it's very branded, and there's no question on the customer side what's happening when the call is triggered. Ad units can also be placed with call tracking in them as well, and those vary, and you could use a toll-free number. In many cases, we assign toll-free numbers in ad units. In other cases, we have click-to-call embedded in the ad unit as well, and that tracks the site. So making pay-per-call work, really, on the publisher side and the network side, what we've seen is it's improving the user experience. It's increasing conversion rates on behalf of the publishers and the networks. It's addressing fraud or lead-related issues. It's verifying the lead as the call is triggered and connected. Flexible call routing, so we can route to multiple call centers, and whoever picks up first gets it. At the same time, we could route to 5 different advertisers, and whoever actually answers the phone first gets the lead. It's adding a higher CPA to these networks, and we're monetizing the mobile content, which is in scale availability, and it fits into your network. Those are things that you need to look for. Advertisers, again, trained call centers are really required. There are no geo restrictions, so in other words, you can take calls from all across the country, not specific markets. Strong ad copy, higher payouts are typically offered. So we see a range up to $60 per call from our advertisers. And this reduces lead decay, form fatigue, higher conversion rates for the advertiser, and then it rewards the publisher as well. So it's all tracked back to the system. So that is my presentation, and I'll turn it over now to John.
Thanks, DC. And thank you all for joining us today. Really appreciate you taking time out of your schedule. I'm going to talk about email as an acquisition tool. How many in here use email as an acquisition tool right now that you work with a third party to generate leads for you? Okay, great. Maybe 10, 20% of you. It's important to know that email inventory is all over the internet. 60% almost of inventory available to buy on the internet is around the inbox, and that starts to make sense when you think about if you go to Gmail or Yahoo or Hotmail. There's ads everywhere, as well as in email. So when I talk about email is a way to get a lot of inventory, we're talking about the whole experience for most of the users that are out there. The Email Experience Council published a report that said that it's a $23 billion industry. The ROI spent on email is generally $50 for every dollar that you spend. So it's also a very, very high payout kind of place to be. Email's ubiquitous. How many of you have checked email on your mobile phone? I'm not going to ask how many people have an email account. So on your mobile phone, right. How many of you have checked email on your mobile phone in your car while you're driving? Right? Email's pretty ubiquitous. How many's checked email on their mobile phone while they're in the bathroom? Right. Email is everywhere, guys. Email is the original social network. If you think about it, if you wanted to email or rather talk to your grandma but not get on the phone, you probably sent her an email. And you probably still do today. Is she on Facebook? Probably not. So email is definitely a ubiquitous animal out there. It's the #1 tactic for US marketers, 94% adoption rate. I don't know many people who don't use email in some form or fashion. It also works, right? So if you look at the statistics across all the different channels that are online, email seems to stack up pretty well. For those of you that can't read it, click-through rate on search is generally 11.4%. It's pretty good, but you pay per click, so I don't know that that's great. Click-through rate on displays is about 0.15%. On a great website, it might be double that. I got it. Email's generally about 3%. Right, 3 to 4% for a good email creative. Click-to-conversion rate, 3.4% for search, 1% for display, about 13% for email is our experience. And then the impression-to-conversion rate, so just get down apples to apples. If you're buying on a CPM, it generally beats the other 3 metrics. I've got about 180 clients, so I couldn't tell you about all of them today, but we've got some really good brands that are out there. Daytrain Media actually just published a case study, bless you, that 40% of the respondents to an eHarmony offer, and I think it's 37%, had never heard of eHarmony before. Has anybody in here not heard of eHarmony before? Right, one person? Right, most people have heard of them because they spend, I don't know, $70, $80 million a year on TV. 40% of these people had never heard of them, according to Dynamic Logics, who did the study. We've got a client who's a tax company, and they're a little bitty brand. They're not somebody you would think of. They're not the big tax companies out there. And in the tax world, if you think about it, there's a lot of compliance regulations. It's not just can spam. You also have to deal with the IRS, who I'm sure everybody in the room loves to deal with. It's hard to do it. And so they found that email was the easiest way for them to go out and generate boatloads of leads, and their competitors weren't using it because it was too hard. We also have a client who's a mobile carrier, like an AT&T or Verizon, one of the carriers, and they were finding that they could lift brand awareness and purchase intent 23% for people who are in market for a phone, which, I don't know, I'd rather get 25% more customers than my competitors. Email can be used to do a lot of things: acquire customers, build brand, build purchase intent. And I have a lot of clients who tell me that email leads generally are better than other things that you can do online. So we'll talk about compliance a little bit because that's what UnsubCentral does. There's typically 10 checks that we think every email should go through. They fit into these 3 categories: content, sending in data, and then unsubscribe. Postal address. So the postal address regulations became more clear. Better yet, who doesn't know that can spam changed this year? Actually, everybody knows that can spam changed. I don't want the one person who doesn't know to have to raise their hand. They changed, the law went into effect in June. So the postal address, it used to be unclear what that could be. Now it's very clear it can be a P.O. box. So every email that you send out that's commercial in nature needs to have a postal address. It's got to have a relevant subject line. We generally recommend that clients don't put the word free in the subject line unless whatever the product is totally free. There's been a lot of court cases that back us up on that. So if you're thinking about putting the word free in a subject line, know that you probably need to go research that and talk to a lawyer and make sure that you're actually going to give away whatever you just said was free. The from line can't be deceptive, right? It's also become more clear after the changes in CAN spam that the from line needs to be the sender. So it can't just be DVD giveaway. It probably needs to be the advertiser's name. Like, who really is that from? Or if the publisher has decided that they're going to be the sender, it needs to be from the publisher, not from DVD giveaway. So keep that in mind. I can talk more about that specifically if there's questions about how to do who's the sender, who's the initiator, those kinds of things. The question is, does affiliate marketing throw a twist into these? It's easy to do email if you're sending your own email. If you're working through third parties, through affiliates, the question is, how do we maintain our compliance across all of those folks? And I think it's just that you've got really strict rules that comply with the law and are going to keep you out of trouble if you're an advertiser. And then at the same time, you work with affiliates that you trust, that you can trust. You work with a network who's got enough advice to be able to give the affiliates the right things to do. And you make sure that the affiliates understand, don't change my subject line to include the word free. You just can't do that. Sending and data compliance is generally relatively easy to deal with. Forged email headers. How many of you have opened your inbox and seen an email at the top that it got there in 2020? Right? The date was changed so that it would be at the top no matter what you did when you opened your inbox. That's a forged email header, right? So that's not a good practice. It's probably illegal. If you ever have to defend it, let me know if you find out if it is. It's a forged header. There's all kinds of things that are technical that you can change in the headers. You don't want to be forging headers. You don't want to let other people do it. Don't send through an open relay. I've seen a court case where an open relay could be T-Mobile had their relay open and you were using T-Mobile accounts, and that could be an open relay. You're not going to know if it's open or not, so my advice is always send it through your corporate SMTP server. You know that one's not. Or if you're using an ESP, use them. And then sending to harvested emails. The key there is harvested emails are anything that's gathered by a bot. So if you want to spend personally a whole lot of time gathering email addresses off places, it's probably legal. The question is that good data? Probably not. If you use a bot to harvest emails, it's definitely not something that you should be doing. Unsubscribe compliance, it's generally really simple. You have to have an unsubscribe link in every commercial email that's out there, right? Commercial is anything that's advertising anything. So if you've got a transactional message and you put an ad into it, you might think about letting people unsubscribe from the advertising portion. At the same time, because of the way CAN spam changed in June, it's a lot clearer now that you don't necessarily have to have 2 or 3 or 4 unsubscribe links in every email. You really only need to have one from the sender. At the same time, there's nothing saying you can't have 2. So depending on how you want to run your email program, if you're an advertiser or a publisher, understand the regulations and understand the liability, if you will. I think one of the things that people forget about is now that we can have one sender, great. Maybe I don't have to comply with CAN spam if I'm a publisher or an advertiser. It works both ways. The problem is that if the party that you decided was the sender doesn't comply, now you did have to comply and your unsubscribe link isn't there, and now you're looking at liability. It's got to be a link or an email address. It has to work for 30 days. Failure to honor. Has anybody not heard the term failure to honor? So failure to honor means that you fail to honor the unsubscribe request after 10 days, like the law states. You need to be monitoring for that. You need to be checking that. The challenge when we work with lots of people is that it might take a while for systems to flow the data through. If you're a big company, you might have 3 big massive data centers running on old mainframes, and they do things in batch, so it might take 2 or 3 days for you to get data from one place to another. You need to be monitoring. Are we actually doing what we say we're going to do? Are we complying with the law? And there's great companies out there like Lashback who help you do that. Suppression list abuse is something that UnsubCentral focuses on, and that is, if I'm working with somebody, did they send mail to my suppression list? We see it happen for all kinds of reasons. A lot of times it's just human error, right? Bob put the list in the wrong section of the ESP and hit send. It happens. At the same time, if it's a nefarious practice, if it's something that you didn't want to happen, you want to know that it's happening so that at least you can call and talk to the people in charge and make sure that they fix the problem. How do we ensure that they play by the rules? Again, I think it's that you use companies that monitor this stuff for you so that you've got a verified third party out there. You can also do things like go sign up at Gmail, Hotmail, et cetera, for lots of seed addresses. It just becomes a lot of work when you start working with lots of people. Don't need to tell you who we are. We've got a booth downstairs you can stop by. Want me to take any more time? No, I'll do this.
Thanks, John. It's great to be here. My name is Dave Wengel. I'm the General Manager of the Interactive Markets team with TARGUSinfo. Just very briefly on TARGUSinfo, we're a privately held company, approximately 170 employees, around $110 million a year in revenue. To boil this down, we essentially do three things. We help companies identify, verify, and qualify the consumers that are contacting them. We are a real-time company, so transactions that are sent to us are done in sub-second time. It might sound hokey, but if you get caller ID at home, odds are that data is coming from TARGUSinfo. Or if you've called in Dell Computer and they know who you are, even though you've never called before, that's TARGUSinfo telling them who they are. Or if you're any one of the millions of consumers that are filling out lead gen forms, TARGUSinfo helps today the leading lead generation companies, affiliate networks, identify and verify these folks. So, a lot of these numbers are pretty well known to each of you. Lead generation is overall a small subset of online ad spend. It's about, I believe it's 8 or 9% of the total spend, but it's been growing exponentially faster than search or display. And I think that innovation, though, in online lead generation has been much slower to catch up with the growth than the other parts of online advertising. A few years ago, people really weren't that focused about quality-based solutions. They were doing what we refer to at TARGUSinfo as validation. So they were looking to see, is this address that a consumer provided, is it a real address according to the post office? Or is the name that was provided, is it an obscenity, or is it a real name? Similarly, from a phone number perspective, can we dial that phone number? However, what TARGUSinfo found, and we'll get into this in a second, was that in many cases, these types of checks that are seemingly free do more harm than good to businesses. So the next wave of solutions rolled out by a number of companies, which is verification. So essentially, verification, for you that aren't familiar with it, is the ability to triangulate data back and forth. So the person that provided a name, address, and phone number, these three things go together. So with DC, does DC live at that address? Did the phone number that DC provided actually belong to DC? Is it connected to him? Obviously, if you can triangulate these pieces of data, you're far more likely to be able to contact this person, and in addition, also convert them at a much higher rate. So the verification and validation are very valuable for typically people that are selling leads. It's much like an auto manufacturer selling a car. The onus or responsibility for quality is on the seller. What many folks are now looking at, especially from the advertiser side, is the ability to score a lead. So there's a number of companies out there today that can tell you not just whether a lead can be contacted, but can a lead be proven to convert at 5 times greater the average rate for the typical respondents? Will they be more likely to be a profitable lead? Will they be less likely to churn if they're a student? So I think what you'll see in the coming year are a number, especially advertisers in the online education space, automotive and financial, spending more time and more energy on data analytics to be able to predict whether a lead is going to convert better, be more profitable, or have a lower amount of churn. Just a brief case study on what I was speaking to in regards to the lead validation process. Overall, we were speaking with one online school. They had said that 15% of leads had incomplete data that was rejected. They were sending leads through to a third party. An additional 20 to 25% of those leads were being rejected due to incomplete data coverage. What we found was that over 40 to 45% of the volume that was being rejected potentially could have been saved. So in other words, the example I gave where an address was said to be bad, that might have been because it just wasn't standardized, or a phone number might have had a digit transposed, so it looked like this phone number couldn't be called. What we found by investing a little bit more money in the process in terms of the data scrubbing, the client was able to save an inexorable amount of money. Overall, the solution they were spending was about $20,000 a year in terms of what their spend was. What they found, though, was that over the course of 1 week, they were able to save more leads off of essentially the floor by using a service such as Targus, there are other ones out there as well, to be able to verify that this data is in fact good. In terms of publisher lead quality issues, I think especially in the affiliate space, there's really 2 issues. There's the data quality issue, which is fairly obvious. It's, can this lead be contacted, or is it a lemon? But I think that the biggest issue pressing the industry going forward is going to be on intent or lack thereof. So there was a leading home remodeling lead gen company that recently was overwhelmed by amount of affiliate leads that came in where the contact data was good. However, people that were being called said they had never signed up for this service. So what the company found was that a number of their affiliates had essentially scanned white page information and then put it through. So there is no silver bullet for this today. Fortunately, it's not pervasive throughout the industry, but it's absolutely a challenge. And there's a number of ways to handle that. You can do, unfortunately, most of them require investments. You can use a third party to call through these leads. You can obviously track, make sure that each lead is tagged by affiliate so you can look for trends. But this is an issue, and I'd like to hear anyone's feedback at the end of this if they have had this issue, how they've gone about solving it, because we've heard more about it at TARGUSinfo, and unfortunately, I think it looks to be continuing. I'm going to pass it back to Kelli.
I'm just going to quickly tie things up, and then we'll open it up for questions for the panelists. So first, I want to thank the panelists for their contributions. And just to kind of close things out here, I think for those of you in the room, we had a lot of both advertisers and publishers in the room. For those of you in the room who are either involved in or thinking about online lead generation, I strongly encourage you to consider an approach that takes into account strong lead quality measures, some of the things that Dave was talking about, an overall customer relationship management strategy to really be able to mine and cultivate the leads that you're getting from various sources, very tight compliance controls around all of the different channels that you're managing, and then of course aggressive campaign and channel testing with the right kind of measurement system in place to really understand the effectiveness of the investment that you're making. So what I'm going to do at this point then is open it up for any questions that you have of the panelists. I'll save my questions for the end, time permitting. Yes?
So I do a lot of lead gen for widescreen computers. But the kinds of activity for this slide right here is very different. I don't see a lot of networks producing small size advertisements. Can any of you guys recommend networks that will produce the .mobile size lead gen that really marketers can use?
Well, there are a few publishers that actually do produce the creative. And so if they have more of a walled garden environment, like Handmark, for instance, where the application runs on the phone, they can do more display type advertising, and they'll actually create the units on behalf of the advertisers that fit into their form. And so, that's typically one route, is to go to a publisher that has some scale. I'm not sure if your question was designed, are you looking to take those yourself and to push those to publishers, or you're looking for folks that just provide that?
Publisher, and typically I will direct link to a lead gen offer.
Yeah.
It would be do a lot of online ads. But I don't see agencies putting out these kinds of landing pages for the affiliates to pick up.
I think the fact of the matter is that there are so many devices that are non-compliant, and so what you end up with is a form factor that the device dictates. And so only someone that's running an application on a phone knows the device. If they know the device, then they can fetch the unit that fits into the device because they know it. I think it's because there's no standard size format for mobile advertising yet, and you're always going to have that problem.
So the answer is no, nobody's doing it.
No, not that I'm aware of. We've only dealt, and we deal a lot in mobile because mobile CPA has been lacking. So they come to us for these pay-per-call ads, and the publisher will typically create the ad units on behalf. We'll give them the design creative. We'll give them an example. They'll take it, borrow that, create their own unit, and push it to the device. And it's not something that we see folks creating turnkey solutions for yet.
The reason I ask this question is because in the Ask the Expert session downstairs, they had a mobile representative. The mobile representative wasn't American guy. He was an immense amount of business. So I understand that for you guys, there's just a huge number of large screen lead gen pictures. It would be a helpful thing to have small screen
Yeah.
When I was at 24/7 Real Media, we did rep a couple mobile networks, so the different carriers, and that was 5 years ago. I don't know if they still do it or not. You might check with them.
Other questions? Yes, Steve.
On the pay-per-call tracking, is the advertiser paying for the call or for the actual transaction, or is it both? Does your system track both of those?
They pay for the call, but the post-transactional element can certainly be part of it. I think on behalf of the publishers, try to keep it simple. So if you start a dialogue of, well, if a call lasts 5 minutes or longer, they'll pay $50. If it lasts 90 seconds to 120 seconds, they'll only pay $30. The system can track that kind of variable billing, but I think when you dialogue it to a publisher, they're just like, you know what, pay-per-click seems to be working. You have the advertiser figure out what the rate per call is for them to generate a good ROI. And so, sometimes they get it right the first time. Oftentimes what will happen is they'll offer, let's say, $20 a call, and then they'll get a couple hundred calls, 500 calls, or 1,000 calls that will generate in a week. And then they'll sit down with their reps, and then they'll look at the phone numbers of the inbounds that we delivered to them, and they'll check conversion rates. So they'll see how many of those people actually became customers. And then they can correlate, the advertiser can correlate what they should be paying per call. So it's really on behalf of the advertiser to sort that out.
And just to piggyback off that, DC, are you seeing in certain industries differences in terms of the correlation between the duration of the call and the quality of the lead or the close rate on the back end?
Yes, so our competitor, a company called Ingenio, standardized with a 15-second duration, and what we found is that the duration is fairly short. I think the reason they were able to get away with it is because they had distribution through AOL, and so as a result of that, you can kind of dictate a shorter duration. What we found is that not all publishers and networks are really created equal, and sometimes longer durations are required. And so we'll try to mitigate that through discussions with the advertiser, and then they'll buy a test of $10,000 worth of calls, and then they'll figure out what the actual value needs to be. And typically, if someone does make a phone call, that's what's interesting. If someone does go through the process of making a phone call, either by dialing the number or clicking to call, they're submitting some personal information. So they are very qualified at that juncture, and they're also reachable. At the same time, we've had to do some things in the IVR, such as when the customer's called, confirm, did you ask to be contacted? If so, press 1, and then they're connected. So we've had to employ those types of things, I think, to mitigate bad calls that may have been inadvertent or non-intended. And specifically in some publisher networks, like mobile, especially with SMS advertising, people inadvertently, they'll pocket dial because the SMS comes through their device, and then they'll have it in their pocket, and it hits to dial it. And so then a call comes into an advertiser, and they're like, hello, hello, and then it'll be a little kid on the other end saying, who am I talking to? So they really didn't want to make the call. So what we've done is we've implemented an IVR prompt that says, press 1 to be connected now, and other qualifications can actually occur as well.
Yes.
Hi. What increment do you see from a campaign that's a pure form fill to a campaign that's a pure form fill with a phone number? I've got two parts to this question.
Yeah.
With a phone number that they can dial, and then alternatively, what's the best option to go for, either phone this phone number or call me back? Where do those things work?
Well, within forms, what we've seen is that in this example with it was a mortgage firm, they found that they put a phone number in the page, and at the same time they had a little form. And a majority of the people actually would go to the form, fill it out, and then submit call, as opposed to just taking the phone number off the page and calling the phone number. So I think people are comfortable with forms. I think they feel like it makes them feel like someone's going to be on the same page with them when they do ultimately place that call. So we've seen, depending upon the implementation, a higher call connection rate with the click-to-call service if it's embedded properly into a page. And typically on the lead gen side, the forms are very short. In many cases, it's just a phone number. Publishers like this because they're not driving to a 10 form fill. They're driving to a page that just has a phone number. If a guy gives a phone number and says, call me, then they feel like that's qualified enough. So.
Yes.
I'm just curious, a lot of the discussion is about around B2C programs as opposed to B2B programs. So I was wondering if you guys are working in the B2B space, like seeing and how to leverage lead gen.
You want to chat about that?
Yeah, I think it's obviously just from the amount of advertising out there, it's obviously, for the most part, a much smaller proportion versus the B2C. There are companies, interesting companies out there, such as, I don't know if you're familiar with a company like Beougher and others that have been able to leverage, the lead generation model in really driving their business off of that. I haven't seen nearly as much fraud or lead quality issues with the handful of business-to-business lead generation as with the B2C. I'm not sure if that's because of the scale of that B2C has taken on, but just I would say overall there's significantly fewer companies that have been able to do it successfully from the B2B side.
So from the email perspective, B2B actually works. Email works better for B2B than it works for B2C. And I think that's generally because when you're using email from an acquisition perspective in B2B, you start with a much more qualified list. And so generally, it works great for brand building. And in the B2C world, it can work really well for brand building, but that's generally in the B2C world, you're looking for pure acquisitions. In the B2B world, generally the purchase consideration is a lot higher, right? You're looking at 10, 20, $100 million sales. B2C, you're looking for a $40 subscription. So.
You can kind of think about it like WebEx, where it is kind of a personal space, and it's too fast. I know like people like Tippet and kind of
We've spent some time with Tippet during San Francisco also, and I think if you take a look at the publisher community, many that have good domains will utilize those domains to drive leads to verticals, business verticals. So we try to remain agnostic to the space and just say, listen, if a call is important and you want someone driven into a call center, whether it's yours to vet that out or to the advertiser themselves, we can provide a call solution that will do that and provide a consumer with a good experience. So,
Did that help? Okay.
That's a no.
I mean, the only thing I'll add to this is probably stating the obvious, but in LinkShare we do have a lot of advertisers, both on the retail side and the lead gen side, that are focusing on the SOHO market or the small business market. And oftentimes it is a little bit more of a challenge to tap into a traditional affiliate network to get the right sources of traffic. So they've been very interested in, and we've been helping to facilitate, partnerships across our advertisers. So looking at our base of advertisers themselves as a network. And so, for example, let's say I'm a customer, I go to advertiser A, and during the checkout process, they can recognize that I'm buying a small business type product, and then the ability to serve up, let's say, an offer for Pitney Bowes to be able to drive leads to Pitney Bowes, either directly to a lead to the phone or to a web-based lead. And we've seen a lot of success through those types of advertiser-to-advertiser partnerships within the network. Other questions? So I have a couple actually that I want to throw to our panelists before we wrap things up. So Dave, first for you, based on where you sit in the lead management cycle, obviously the lead gets to you after a consumer's already filled out a form, but what are you seeing that advertisers often fail to do on the web form itself that they could utilize to better qualify the lead before it ever reaches either their internal scrubbing efforts or your verification technology?
Sure. I think that the first thing to do, everyone's cognizant that they want to make it as simple as possible for the lead to get done. They don't want people abandoning forms. So I think they really need to ask themselves, how do we plan on reaching out to this person? Is it going to be through email? Is it going to be through a proactive calling campaign? Is it potentially with a pay-per-call application such as DCs. But for the ones where there isn't an immediate outreach, let's say if it is going to be phone, they should maximize the amount of phones that they can capture. Instead of just having one place for phone, they should say, can I have your home phone, cell phone, business? They might not put all three down, but if someone's willing to give all three, you've at least tripled, if not more, your opportunities or chances to get through them. And I think there's also something to be said for at least giving opportunity for a qualification or a qualifier. So beyond just checking off boxes, there's a company, I think it was LeadQual, that said in their past experience, they found that the greatest contributor, the greatest identifier that a lead was going to convert was whether someone put down a statement with their lead. So if someone put down a form, I want to be contacted right away about a car, this lead closed exponentially higher than the rest. And so I think, in most people's efforts to try to make it simple and slow down the process, sometimes those items are forgotten. So.
And so also, what do you see is an advertiser's typical tolerance for invalid leads, or the ratio of invalid to valid that they get through different sources? And are you seeing that trend change over time? And is there anything that correlates to certain industries?
Yeah, I think that there's been, it's typically directly correlated with the price that's paid. And unfortunately, on the advertiser side, they do need to give a fair shake to the publishers to recognize that a lead that they're paying 20 cents for isn't going to have the intent and the data quality necessarily of one that they're investing $30 in. But I think overwhelmingly now, more and more advertisers have grown tired of certainly at least the perception of bad lead quality, which are names that are clearly a waste of their time. And as advertisers get savvier and savvier, if they don't feel that their publishers are investing in the lead quality tools, they're doing it themselves, and they're cherry picking which leads they're willing to buy. And if they don't do that, they'll go to new ones. But I think over the last 2 years, certainly on the publisher side, the majority of the brand names have invested heavily in not just one approach of verification, but multiple tiers of having their own call center folks qualify the leads themselves. So it's a completely different market as it was 2 years ago in terms of the amount of money people are investing in quality. So overall, an improvement.
And on that topic, we had an interesting use case. We had a publisher who was driving leads, and they had to qualify the leads before they would pass them off. And so they had a person doing that, calling back the phone numbers that were filled out in the forms. And what they've decided to use is our technology instead. They do a post to us with the phone number. We generate an automatic call to the customer and vet it through the IVR. So the IVR first says, if you asked about diabetes supplies, press 1. If you have Medicare, press 1. And so there's 3 prompts that are given. If they respond appropriately to each one of those, which is confirming and vetting the lead, then we pass the data back to the advertisers, so that way they can then sell it to, we give it to the publisher so the publisher can sell it to the advertiser. So automated vetting of the lead instead of a person actually making the call.
So just switching gears for a second, question for you, John, about email. So you talked a little bit about designated sender. What should publishers do about opt-outs? Meaning, do they need to provide options for the consumer to opt out of their list as well as the list of each of their advertisers that they're promoting? And how does that differ in a single advertiser versus a multi-advertiser campaign?
So I know I told you you could ask me that question. We're going to be here hours with that answer. I'm not a lawyer. Let's start with that. Nor will I defend any of you in court. But the key is that the rule changed in that prior to May, there was the term sender, and then there was the term initiator in CAN-SPAM. And everybody was kind of confused over who was really liable and who was really the sender. And so you would see, I'll use the easy example, which is the one the FTC gives. In an American Airlines email, there would be an ad for Budget and an ad for Hilton and an ad for Hyatt and maybe another rental car company. And all these big brands were like, well, we've got to comply with the law, so that they would want to put 5 or 6 unsubscribed links and 5 or 6 postal addresses, and that wasn't the intent of the law. It's very clear that email is from American Airlines, and it's 2 people who've opted in. And so the current wording, designated sender, allows all of those companies to get together and say, American Airlines, you're the sender, you have to comply with CAN-SPAM. And I think that's a pretty easy understanding of the law. The challenge is, so what if you work with a publisher who says, no, advertiser, you're the sender? Does the publisher then have to comply with CAN spam? It's a really good question. I'd love to see how lots of publishers deal with that. And I think that's still to be proven out in the courts. If I were an advertiser, if I were a brand, I would want to be the sender all the time because I can control things and I can keep myself out of trouble. And at the same time, if I were a publisher, I'd want to be the sender. So it's a kind of a tough challenge for people. Again, there's nothing saying you can't have 2 unsubscribes in an email. And then you're giving the consumer the ultimate choice, and that's really probably the right way to do things.
So speaking of well-recognized brands, advertisers with strong brands. So oftentimes when we're talking to email publishers, they're interested in running campaigns for advertisers with well-recognized brands. How have you seen campaign results stack up between those types of opportunities and lesser-known advertisers?
Very much to Dave's point, it really comes down to the payout, right? There's kind of 4 things that make an email work: the from line, the subject line, the creative itself, and then how much are they paying for the lead. If one advertiser is spending $50 for a lead and another one's spending $20 for a lead, it doesn't really matter whose brand's better. If the publisher makes more money off the $50 lead, that's the one that works better for that publisher. And so when the advertisers are working with publishers, they need to think about that from a competitive perspective. That said, if all things are equal and you've got a brand that's very well known and they spend lots of money in other medium channels, those are probably going to work better than the lesser known brands. But it's totally dependent, in my mind, on the offer itself. What is it? Is it a good offer? And what the payout is.
So before we wrap things up, any other final questions from anyone in the audience? No? Okay, well, thank you all for joining us.